Hi, welcome to another edition of One to One with me, Sheriff Sesker. Today we're talking about domestic violence and gun violence. I have a special guest with us here today, Miss Laura Morris. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for inviting me.
Great to have you here. Now, you're here because you have a story to tell. You have a very compelling story that people need to hear about.
Sure.
Tell us about what happened to you.
So, I had a boyfriend who became my husband, who was violent, and it was escalating violence. It didn't all get really bad all at once. It was years of escalating, a push or a shove became a smack and a punch. And when he realized that those things weren't having that much effect on me anymore, then he brought out a gun and terrorized me with a handgun for a long time. And one night we were having an argument. I wanted to go out and have dinner with my girlfriends, which was not something that he was going to condone. And we got in a fight, and he pushed me on the sofa and put a gun to my stomach and told me he was going to kill me, and it was going to be a gunshot to my stomach because those gut wounds hurt the worst.
Right.
And so what must have happened is that I must have, when he was pulling the trigger, raised my arm, and the bullet went through my shoulder and into the sofa and the wall behind. Thankfully, it didn't go through my heart, which I just realized a few years ago. If the timing of that had been off, I would have been dead for sure. And I was so afraid because at that moment I knew he could actually do it. Because for a few minutes I thought I was dead because I thought he'd shot me in the stomach and I didn't feel any pain. And he was screaming, "Oh my God, I really killed her. I killed her."
Okay.
And so we made an agreement that I wouldn't call the police, which I hadn't had a good experience with the police with this in the past, and this was many years ago. This was 1981. Okay. And so I buried the gun in the yard, but then he brought home a shotgun and started putting it to the back of my neck, over my heart, and then one day I just woke up and thought, I'd rather be dead than live like this.
Right.
And so I'm leaving, and if he kills me, he kills me, but at least I made an effort to get out. And we had a young son, and I was terrified of what it was doing to him to see this kind of violence. So I didn't speak about it for decades because the stigma involved with being shot and domestic abuse, I just didn't want people to know. And then probably it was around Sandy Hook, and I could see all those children's faces, and I thought, as an adult, I was terrified to have a gun pointed at me. I can't imagine being a small child and having that. And I thought, I'm contributing to the stigma that's keeping me and other women from speaking out, and I need to just get over myself and start talking about this because there are lots and lots of women and men that experience this, and they need to know that there's a way out.
Okay.
So
now let me ask you this because I want to go back a little bit because I truly want to understand, how you got into this situation. So you're married to this man. But before you married him, was there any signs that might have said, hey, this is not the person I should be with?
There were, and a lot of women, you make excuses. I'd come from sort of a strange background, sort of a dysfunctional background, and so, I craved the attention he was giving me, even if it was negative, it was attention. And so it just, in fact, I was pregnant when we got married, and the agreement was 6 months after our son was born, we were going to get a divorce.
Oh.
And he wouldn't honor that, obviously. He was like, "No, you're my possession." We talked about this earlier.
Right.
You're my possession, he's my possession, you're mine, you're not going anywhere. If you try to leave, I'll shoot you in the back of the head when you least expect it. And so everywhere I would go after work, I'd be afraid he'd be running up behind me, or I'd be, trying to get in the door of the house. I'd be afraid he'd run up behind me and shoot me, and I'd never even know.
Right. And see, one of the things that we had talked about this earlier is one of the things that when you're a victim of domestic violence, the perpetrator looks at you as if you're property. You can't go here, you can't go there because you belong to me.
Yeah, and that's one of the signs is people being isolated. If you notice that one of your girlfriends or your sister or someone starts to just always say, oh, well, we can't make it, oh, I'd love to have coffee, but I can't. If you notice people isolating, that's one of the signs.
Right.
And they do think of you as their property. I
Okay.
mean, that's, they're trying to they think they don't have enough power. So if they take your power, that gives them more power, which isn't true, but that's what goes on psychologically.
Yeah. Now, and I want to clear something up for the people who are viewing. When you were a victim of the shooting, you were living in a different state.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
living in Illinois, so.
You were living in Illinois, because I don't want our viewers to think that this occurred in Anne Arundel
No,
County.
no.
Anne Arundel County Police didn't do anything or something like that. So,
No, this was in Illinois.
yeah, because I know that our county police, who are the primary law enforcement agency in Anne Arundel County, they have a very good domestic violence unit that investigates stuff like this. So I just wanted to clear that up.
Yeah, and this was also 1981 when, there weren't even gun laws to speak of. And, you were still your husband's property.
Okay.
So the
Right.
police would talk to him and say, well, you shouldn't do this. We don't like coming out. And in fact, the last time I didn't always call the police. Sometimes it was the neighbors. The last time that I did call the policeman said, and I didn't want to press charges because I was afraid once he got out of jail, he would really be mad, and that would be the end of me.
Right.
And so I never wanted to press charges, and I told the police, can't you do anything about this without me pressing charges? And the one policeman said, if you call us again and don't press charges, I'll arrest you.
Okay, that's terrible.
Yeah,
that-
so then I just I didn't call them anymore.
Right. They treated you as if you were a pain, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't like coming out here.
Right.
You're wasting our time. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm in this by my own.
Well,
on my own.
one of the things I like to say, I think the way we deal with domestic violence now has changed dramatically since then.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And I think people need to understand that, is that there are resources now to
Right.
help women. There's lots more shelters, there's a lot more assistance. The police are much more. I mean, you
Right.
guys don't like doing this either. I mean,
Right.
it's dangerous. You don't know who's behind that door.
One of the things that we learn in the academy is that when you go on a call for domestic violence, that's probably going to be one of the most dangerous calls that you go on.
Oh, yeah.
So we understand that, now we understand that there's a victim there, that we have to protect the victim, and that's the most important part of responding to the call. But here's another thing that I've learned also. Sometimes we forget about the children, because the
I'm glad
children
you
are
brought that
victims
up.
too.
Yeah.
And I was talking to someone who lived in a house that had domestic violence, and what she was telling me was that they dealt with the grown-ups, but the children were witnesses to everything. And she said that she now suffers from PTSD from what she observed as a young child.
Absolutely.
So I think we still need to work with children as well.
Oh, yeah. And it's dangerous, too, because many times I had a girlfriend recently that was telling me she was shot by her husband. And when she finally got out of the hospital and came home, one of the investigating officers stopped by her house and he said, I'm so glad that you're home, and I'm glad you were the only one that was shot, because he said he'd gone to so many other domestic shootings where the husband takes the kids out too.
Oh, wow.
So I think people forget sometimes that they can also be victims.
Yeah. And, one of the things that you had mentioned earlier also, when we were talking back in the back, is that some of our young people, especially our young females, they don't understand what violence is. They may not live with this person, it might be their boyfriend or something in school, but their idea of violence is not quite, or where it should be.
Yeah. And they don't see the red flags that can lead to something more. They have a very, like end stage violence is domestic violence. They don't think that their boyfriend pushing her or shoving her or maybe leaving a bruise when he grabs her arm or keeping her from seeing her girlfriends. She doesn't think that that's abuse, because it's not this full-blown beating you up sort of thing. And I think that's one of the things, I don't know if parents are just not telling their children this, because it's a hard subject to bring up, especially if you haven't been impacted by it. you know, you're not sure that how you should talk about it. And so I don't know if parents need to do a better job, if schools need to, churches.
Well, you know what? This is what I would tell the parents. It's a tough subject to talk about when your child is actually the victim. So we need to talk about them before they become the victim.
Yeah.
You know, educate them. We do it for everything else. We do it for drugs, we do it for alcohol, we do it for even when they start driving. Don't do this, don't do that, look out for this. So we need to tell our young people, our kids, you know, and we as parents need to talk to them and say, I have 2 daughters of my own, as you probably know, and I started talking to them at a relatively young age before they started dating so they'll get a better understanding. And I tried to show them by example.
Oh,
you know,
that's good.
How to treat
that's
a woman,
really good.
you know, or how to treat a significant other. Because although domestic violence is, victims are primarily women, we now know that men are victims of domestic violence as well.
Lots of men.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things too, is there is no profile of an abuser or a victim. And so just because, you know, he comes from a good family and they have money and they live in the right neighborhood and he gets good grades, that doesn't mean that he's not an abuser. And I talk about domestic abuse from a woman's point of view. So I talk about women as being the abused and the men as abusers more than I probably should, but that's my experience. So, but it's interesting because you can't tell from looking at people. It goes across socioeconomic, across race, religion. I mean, you just don't know who's going to be.
It affects everybody.
It's everybody, yeah.
Look, I'm going to ask you something, but before we move on, I need to know, when you were shot, did you hide it? How did you hide the fact that your husband had shot you?
So the bullet, because it was at such close range, and it's so strange because I hadn't thought about a lot of this for years. For many years, I wanted to be able to forget it. I wanted to take the scar and have it removed. I just wanted this to never have happened. And so it's only recently in the last decade or so that I've actually started to think. And one of the things I thought about earlier this year was, why didn't it bleed? Because somebody had said, well, didn't you bleed all over?
Right.
And the bullet was so close and so hot that it cauterized it as it went. And it sort of grazed me, which I hesitate in telling people that it wasn't. I have friends that are carrying bullets, so it seems minor compared to theirs, but the emotional was just the same. But and even up until probably 5 years ago, I would never wear anything sleeveless if I thought people were going to see it and ask me questions. What happened? Did you get cut? Did you get burned? You know, now obviously I'm older and it's fading finally, but it was just always that constant reminder of. And now I don't want to say it's a badge of honor, but it does remind me that that's the very worst thing that ever happened to me. And I got through that, so I can get through anything.
That's right.
So.
And what I always like to tell people is, in the office of the sheriff, you know, I'd like to see, when we come in contact with a victim of domestic violence, I want to be able to see them all the way through until they become a survivor.
I think that's great.
You know, and I think most law enforcement agencies, if they don't, they should, you know, look at it that way. We want to see you from victim all the way to survival. You know, it should not be if you call the police because of domestic violence, and then, you know, you get some reprieve at that moment, then you call back again, and you got to start the whole process over again. Nobody knows who you are. Oh yeah, somebody else responded here. It should be a continuous thing where you get continuous help. Right. You know.
And because it's so hard. I think I hear different statistics, but the last one I heard is that it takes 7 times for a woman to finally leave. And there's a myriad of reasons, and you should never judge somebody by it because you don't know the circumstances. But they'll go back. And then I think a lot of people think, well, she's walking right back in. I'm done with her. Well, no, that's when she needs you the most. Because she will leave again, one way or another. Whether in a body bag or on her 2 feet, she will leave again. Oh,
yeah. You know, I've been a police officer for a little while now, and I've responded to quite a few calls for domestic violence and things like that. And that's one of the things that I did see. I could go to court for a domestic violence case, and then I see the victim coming in with the defendant, and now they're arm in arm.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
It,
And it's hard to understand, and I know people that haven't lived through it don't understand it, and I can relate to that, but it's one of those things, like with me, I was so afraid that he was going to kill me when we weren't together. It was better to keep him close to me where I knew what he was doing, even though I was probably in more danger, but I was just so afraid of him.
yeah.
Doing something, like he said, I'll walk up behind you and shoot you in the back of the head, you'll never even know what happened.
Oh, gosh. So now, let me ask you this, because I think people probably want to know. How's your life now?
My life is fantastic.
All right.
I remarried. I had a second husband,
Okay.
and when I lived in Illinois, and that didn't work out for a myriad of reasons. A lot of it was I hadn't gotten over the trauma from the first husband.
Okay.
I moved out to DC in 2001. I met my third husband, my
Okay.
final husband, and we've been married since 2011, and we moved to Annapolis, and
Oh,
we're
great.
very, very happy.
Well, look, we're glad to have you in Anne Arundel
Thanks.
County, and I know
Thank you.
Annapolis is glad to have you as well.
Yes.
So thank you for coming here. Now, you have an organization that you're getting off the ground?
Yeah, so one of the things, I previously worked with a gun violence organization that also worked with survivors of gun violence. And one of the things that I had realized is that people that have been impacted, people that have been shot in particular, don't want to talk about it, just like I didn't want
Okay.
to, for a million different reasons. Mostly it's the weird questions, it's the trauma of having to relive it. And so they just didn't talk about it, and they didn't reach out. Sometimes they would go to talk to a therapist, and that would work sometimes. But what they really wanted, and you see this in all kinds of, with cancer patients, with everyone, they want peer support. And so I'm putting together an organization that provides peer support for people that have been shot and wounded, because I have, in fact, we had a call the other night. There's one woman on the call. She was shot 50 years ago as a small child, and her family had always told her, just tell people you were in a car accident.
Oh,
And so she's never had any way of talking to people about this trauma. And I
Right.
talk to people all the time. It's been 20 years, it's been 25 years. And once they start talking to other people that understand that shared experience, it suddenly gives them a different perspective and helps them. So, I also want to be able to provide a resource for where they can get different services.
Right.
Because it's like with most things, even with most mass shootings, you always hear about the people that have died, but somehow the people that have been shot, they just give their ages, they might give their names once and you never hear about them
Right.
again. And some of them end up in wheelchairs, some of them have lifelong pain, you know, they have mobility issues, and so I just want to give those people a chance at healing too.
Well, that's great. That's great. Now, one of the things that I know that dealing with domestic violence, sometimes what happens is, you know, we can't understand why wouldn't you tell somebody you've been shot? But it's not like the stranger on the street, you get robbed, you get
Yeah.
shot. First thing you do, you dial 911.
Right.
Now we're dealing with a loved one.
Yeah.
A loved one. How do you turn in that loved one? Or at least, you know, the person you think you're in love with or, you know, loves you. So I think that's a lot that people have to deal with domestic violence.
Yeah. And I mean, and there's lots of reasons. I've had women tell me it was financial. You know, I didn't have a way to support myself or my kids. You know, as soon as we got married just out of high school, I've never worked.
Okay.
How do I get an apartment? There's an organization, and I wish I could remember their name, that's here in Anne Arundel County that helps women that have been abused with safe housing and
Okay.
resources to rebuild their lives. And one woman had been there, I think she said 2 years, and she'd gotten a job, she got promoted, she got her skills up, and she bought a house.
Okay.
And the night before the closing, she realized she needed to write a check for the part of the down payment, and she'd never written a check in her life. And she had to call somebody to help her
Write the check.
write the check because she didn't know what she was supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so I think for a lot of women, it's a myriad of reasons. And I think every single woman you talk to, some it comes out of the blue, like my friend that I just talked about that was shot by her husband, and the police were glad he didn't shoot the children. He had never raised a hand to her.
Okay.
And then one day just came home and shot her because she was going to leave him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing I think people also need to understand is it's easy to tell a woman to leave, but that's when it's the most dangerous. That's when the abuser thinks, well, there's nothing else I can do. In fact, it's interesting, my cousin, who's a man, was killed by an abuser. This was down in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
His wife had been, he and the neighbor had never gotten along. And the neighbor's wife had been abused for years and decided she was leaving that day. And so he pulled a gun out, a shotgun, and chased her to the car, and she got away. He shot the window out in the car, and she did get some cuts from the glass.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was just so filled with rage, and he'd always thought that my cousin was sleeping with his wife, which wasn't true. So he went next door and killed my cousin.
Oh, wow. Wow.
A man.
Right,
I mean,
right,
not
right.
even related to him. And so, you know, it's this peripheral amount of damage that can happen from this that's scary.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what, I tell you what, unfortunately, there are a lot of victims out there. And as you know, as a lot of people know, this is the silent crime.
Oh yeah,
because
absolutely.
people don't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm trying to encourage people to do is if you are a victim of domestic violence, you need to bring it to light.
Yeah.
You need to bring it to light because it's not going to stop on its own.
Mm-mm.
It's either going to stop through you leaving as the victim, or unfortunately, when the person kills you.
Yeah.
You know. So before we end,
Mm-hmm.
your new program that you're starting,
Mm-hmm.
have you got a name for it?
Wounded Voices, because like I said, so many people have never spoken about it, and when they find their voice, it's very empowering.
Okay.
So.
Okay. And thank you for making that transition from victim to survivor and now helping other individuals out there. Is there anything that you want to tell a victim out there right now, or somebody who's going through something, whether it had been a victim of domestic violence or they were a victim of a shooting or something like that? Is there anything that you want to relay to them?
There's help out there. You don't have to suffer in silence. Call the Women's Shelter. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence has a lot of resources. Fortunately, there's a lot of resources here in Anne Arundel County, which I'm very happy about.
Okay.
If you're the victim of a shooting, don't suffer in silence, because it doesn't get better that way. It only gets worse. Either talk to a therapist or get in touch with my organization. I can give you some resources, but I would just tell people that the darkness is the worst part. The stigma of not speaking out is making it worse for you. You need to speak about it so it loses its power. Okay. As long as it's your deep, dark secret, it has power over you. As soon as you let it out into the light, it gets so much better.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody at home for joining us. This is a serious issue. This is a very important topic that we as adults, we especially need to talk to our young people, our young kids, boys and girls, because anybody can be a victim. And we definitely want to show our young people how to resolve issues, especially when they're in relationships. So again, thank you for joining us. This is Sheriff Sesker, and remember, as always, look out for one another and be safe.